in South Africa, we have this. We have issues in our basic education system, but even if you go beyond that, we have very low and unequal access to post-secondary education. And this obviously leads to that skills shortening that we were talking about, and then raising the premium, or what individuals with high skills get in the labour market, and leaving the unskilled with low earnings in the labour market. And so what does this do? It results in the poor remaining poor, the rich getting even richer, and this cycle continues. Otherwise also thought of as a poverty trap if you're not part of those that are part of the reward system. So just to put it, to give you some sort of idea of the, if we look at the post-schooling, how qualifications from the post-schooling environment. And when I talk about post-schooling, I'm going to be talking quite broadly about both higher education and the TVET sector, which is meant to be accessible to those that have not completed matric or second grade 12. So I'm talking quite broadly about post-schooling. But what you see here is from the NIDS data, you can look at the reward or that individuals with different types of qualifications get in the labour market. So what you can see here is that relative to somebody with a grade 11, a person with a university degree is earning more than 1.5 times the salary on average. And even if you look at something like a diploma or certificate, you still have this huge reward. And even a grade 12 has a reward relative to not completing matric. So very high rewards for completing some form of post-secondary, but very relatively low access, and access very much. So recognizing that access to post-secondary or post-schooling education is so well rewarded and part of the cycle of inequality, in 2013, the Department of Higher Education and Training presented this 20-year plan, and part of the plan was to increase access or increase numbers in TVET colleges, or technical and vocational education colleges. These colleges are meant to address that sort of in-between skill where there's a focus on vocational education and mid-level skills. Okay, but before we look at post-schooling education, we just do need to take stock of the fact that, as we've been hearing in many of the presentations, there's this cumulative disadvantage that incurs over an individual's life. And if we look at our education system, the basic education system is leaving many behind. So what this graph shows if you start off with 100 grade 1 learners, how many of them are going to reach matric? And what we can see from here is that only 60 of them will write the matric exam. So that means that 40% have dropped out. They haven't even got to the point of matric. And then a further number will not pass the matric exam. And then even so, only 37 of those 100 individuals starting grade 1 will pass the matric exam 12 years later. And of those, only an even smaller percentage will have the type of matric that will allow them to access a diploma or a bachelor's type of certificate, or qualification. So that's a matric pass that allows you to study at a university. So you can pass matric and you can enter the TVET colleges system without the diploma or bachelor's pass, but only 26% of our original group are managing to pass with a diploma or a bachelor's pass. So what is this about? And it's been raised that we have this very unequal system in terms of the quality of education that is provided in our basic education system, very much coming from our history of different types of education systems based on racial categorization. And what you can see here is that the fact that individuals are not getting to matric is not about the individual's lack of commitment to education or valuing of education, but rather that if we look at the numbers, we have extremely high enrollment by age, even beyond our compulsory education level, which is around 16 years. You can see that over 90% of 15 and 16-year-olds are enrolled in school. So this is a sample of individuals that have not completed matric. So this is not looking at enrollment in post-schooling, this is enrollment in school. So we have over 80% of 17 and 18-year-olds still enrolled in school. So it's very much about continual commitment, or it looks like continual commitment, but the issue is of actually attaining the grade 12. And one of the things that you can do if you look at the NIDS data is you can actually track individuals and see, okay, what happens, like what's the chance of you actually moving through the education system smoothly. And just to give you a number as an example, so we see high repetition rates in all grades actually, but I mean, as an example, if you look at an individual, say a male learner in grade 7, 8 or 9, and you look at them again, you look at them in 2008 and then you look at them again in 2012. So you would expect them to progress 4 years, but a third of those individuals will fail at least one grade, and many of them will fail more than one grade. So the incidence of repetition and the probability of moving through the basic education system smoothly without repeating is very low. And then there's obviously a hugely disproportionate number of low socioeconomic learners that are affected by this. Okay, so that was the basic education system, but this presentation is very much looking at access to post-schooling education. And so you can start to think, well, 63% of South Africans do not complete secondary school. So that's grade 12. So they're not going to be eligible to go into the university system. So the TVET colleges do seem like like an alternative to the majority of our youth. They are also meant to be accessible from grade 9. So you only have to complete compulsory education, which is grade 9, and then you, in principle, can access the TVET system. But what we see is very few learners use this as an alternative to matric. So if we look at within the census data, we can see less than 5% of individuals transitioning into the TVET system without having completed matric. And even if we look at those who have got to matric, we see that only 26% of those who enroll post-schooling are going to the TVET system. So the question becomes, why? So if we just step back a little and we think there's been a lot of policy focus on the TVET colleges in South Africa, and if we look at the numbers, there has been a shift in the proportion that are enrolling in TVET colleges. However, if I use the NIDS data and I look at this enrollment pattern, it looks to be that there's a shift away from the university in terms of shares. So there are aggregate increases in the numbers that are enrolling, but of the matric population, there's this apparent shift away from universities into the TVET. So it's not about growing that base, the proportion of matrics going on to the TVET. It's sort of this shift away. And the department's statistics also show an increase in the numbers, but again, it's difficult from those kind of statistics to be able to see what is the impact on the sort of share of those moving on. So if we want to be thinking about post-schooling or post-secondary education enrollment more generally, we need to also be thinking about those that are not participating in any post-schooling education. And then obviously, once you get into the system, whether you're actually moving through and the completion rates within these different institutions. Which leads us to this question, which is, to what extent is entry into post-secondary education dependent on socioeconomic status, financial means, and then academic merit? And so to answer this question, we went to the NIDS data, the National Income Dynamics Study, using the first 4 waves of data. Now, part of the reason why this question has been difficult to answer is because, well, for 2 things. The proportion of individuals that are going on to study in post-secondary is small. So all our survey data has a very small percentage of individuals in these sectors. So that's the one thing. But on the other hand, you need to know about the information of individuals when they're at that point of making the decision to enroll or not. So that's at the point in matric or even pre-matric. So at a point before they've enrolled in the higher education or the post-schooling sector. And so that's what the panel data allows us to do, is to step back and look at individuals when they were in matric and follow them into post-secondary or not enroll. And so that's what we do with the data. We have to construct a group of individuals that are in matric and then observe them 2 years later. So what you can see from here is that of our individuals that we observed in grade 12, this is the percentage in different types of states, within 2 years of completing grade 12. So some individuals might enter into post-secondary at a later stage, but this is within 2 years what happens. And what you can see is that 68% of those youth that were in grade 12 at some point between 2008 and 2014 do not enroll in any form of post-secondary. Now remember, this is already a very select group that have made it through the basic education system to that point of matric. We see that a larger share still enroll in university, and then 8% in the TVET system. So then what we can do is we can start to look at the characteristics of individuals in the matric year based on how they enrolled, in what type of institution they enrolled in future. And what you can straight away see from this figure is that individuals enrolling in any post-schooling education are wealthier, but those enrolling in the university system are on the whole almost 3 times as wealthy. They're living in households that are almost 3 times as wealthy as those that, for example, go to the college sector. So you can start to look at differences in characteristics before they make that decision. What is also interesting to note here is that there's not a huge difference in this baseline income of those that are going to public TVETs versus those that are not enrolling at all. Okay. So then the thing is about one of the big discussions is always about, but what about eligibility? So we've got these issues in our basic education system. So by the time you get to enrollment, there's a difference in academic ability, and it's related to income. So let's look at that. So this graph shows the proportion enrolling in university by your score. So this was a score that NIDS gave to respondents, and basically what it shows, as we would expect, as your scores increase, your probability of enrolling in university is higher. So that's what you would expect, probably of all individuals. The more able are going to university. And you see that with your low income group as well. But if you look at the middle income group, it's very flat. So as individuals' scores increase, there's not much increase in the proportion going to university. So what's going on? What you can see if you then look at TVET enrollment is that those individuals of high score in the top and the bottom income groups, the proportion going to TVETs is dropping down to almost zero at the top end of the distribution of scores, whereas if you look at the middle income group, it's still increasing. So given that going to TVET is less costly, all those kind of things, one of the explanations you could think of is that for the top end of the distribution, their families are supporting them, they can go to university. For the bottom end of the income distribution, they're managing to, the high scoring individuals are managing to access funding that can support them. So you can think of our NISFAS system supporting the lower income. And then it's this in the middle group that are not managing to access the university system. Okay. So then I was going to tell you about the differences. Okay. So just as a note, so remember at the beginning I was saying that it's about those individuals that don't end up going to university or to any post-secondary any education, that we want to know how to expand access for that group. And so we saw even with the incomes that they were quite similar in terms of the TVET enrollees. So you can look at other characteristics. What you can see, if you look at TVET enrollees and those who don't enroll, what we see is that they're similar on some characteristics. They have similar school characteristics, household size, access and reliance on grants, location, and the age. But there are these differences, which is they have more educated parents, better test scores, and they do come from marginally higher income groups. So in thinking about policies to expand that base to TVET, of individuals going to TVET colleges, these are some of the things that we would think of. So I'm going to end with 3 concluding questions, basically, which is how do we best support the low and middle income school leavers who are highly able to enroll in TVETs and universities? And then, does the significant role of short-term credit constraints at TVET enrollment suggest that these additional funding reforms need to be considered? And what are the new reforms that have been implemented this year? What's going to happen in terms of these outcomes? And then, importantly, how do we encourage school leavers with lower levels of scholastic ability, and those especially that don't actually make it all the way to grade 12, to enroll in some form of post-schooling education that will be productive to them?